Good morning, everybody. Happy Tuesday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. Lots of interesting stuff to get into today. Also, a first-time guest, Heather Long. We've been referencing her stuff a lot on the show. She's an economics reporter, colleague of Jeff Stein's over at the Washington Post, so we wanted to have her on. She also just got a big promotion over there, so we can talk to her about that and lots of other, obviously, economic news, including continuing inflation concerns, what that means as we come into the holiday season. As you guys know, if you exist in this country, lots of news about Facebook, lots of questions about this whistleblower, lots of interesting details to kind of dig into there. Who's behind her, what's her agenda, and what is the most important information to take from the leak of these thousands of documents? We'll get into that. Some new curious details about January 6th. We'll tread a little carefully here, but we've been looking into how many potential federal agents may have been there, may have been involved, other informants, operators, etc. Some new indications there that we want to bring to you. Obama is out saying the quiet part out loud as he campaigns for Democratic candidates about the mood of the Democratic base. Some horrific new details revealed about some of the, just unconscionable experimentation that's taking place on animals, and Dr. Fauci is, of course, involved as the leader of the National Institute of Health. Tell you about that. Also, you guys remember that whole situation with Kamala Harris was supposed to be on The View, and then seconds before they bring her out, suddenly they pull two of the hosts because they test positive, allegedly, for coronavirus. And then it turns out they didn't actually have coronavirus. The whole thing was a mess. They never had an explanation of what actually happened here because they'd given the vice president's office the all clear the day before that they'd all been PCR tested and that they were good to go. Now The View has thrown their nurse under the bus. I guess she is
We're gonna get to that.
The fall girl, so we'll tell you all about that. But we wanted to start with the Facebook story that is so dominating mainstream media right now.
Right, so I'm sure everybody saw basically the Facebook papers, files everybody is referring to have been all over the internet the last 2 days. Essentially what happened is that Frances Haugen, I hope I'm saying her name correctly, she has come out, she's the former Facebook product manager, she has troves and thousands of pages of documents. Originally she was leaking and working exclusively with the Wall Street Journal. Now we know that she's actually expanded that to an entire consortium of journalists, many different media organizations.
A consortium that she handpicked and selected.
That's right. And that's the important part, which is that this consortium, this media leak is highly orchestrated by both Frances Haugen and also some people who are funding her, who may not necessarily, who have a little bit of a bone to pick with Facebook. Now, Ben Smith of the New York Times revealed some of this. Let's put this up there on the screen. What we essentially learn here is that Frances Haugen had met with the Wall Street Journal, originally was leaking her documents, but then all of a sudden, a former Democratic political operative named Bill Burton, who used to work for Barack Obama, all of a sudden was hired in order to manage the process. And what we learn further is that Bill Burton begins setting up meetings with all of these different media outlets, creating this kind of like group chat on Slack in which he requires them to kind of work together and wait before they go ahead and publish the documents. Now, this is fishy for a number of reasons. Anytime we start seeing PR officials getting paid by people who aren't necessarily the whistleblower themselves, I've got a lot of questions. And we have also learned who the person who is funding some of these operations are. And Glenn Greenwald has shed a lot of light on this. Let's put this up there on the screen from his Substack. Pierre Omidyar's financing of the Facebook whistleblower campaign reveals a great deal is his headline there. And what he points out, Pierre Omidyar, for those of you who don't know, he made his fortune in eBay. He was a longtime libertarian. He funded a lot of libertarian causes. But what Glenn points to is that when you have oligarchs who are financing various different projects, and you guys should remember that Glenn knows this because Pierre Omidyar famously financed The Intercept after the Snowden leaks. He was an actual believer in libertarianism, but as Glenn points to, while he was working there, all the way up until 2015, Omidyar had nothing, he really did not do anything. However, he says that, quote, there was never a single occasion to my knowledge when he attempted to override our journalistic independence. However, what he talks about is that the arrival of Donald Trump on the political scene changed all of that. As Trump ascended to the presidency, Omidyar became monomaniacally obsessed with opposing Trump. Although he stopped tweeting in March 2019, his 2015-2019 Twitter presence showed that he basically was indistinguishable from the standard daily hysterical MSNBC panels or New York Times op-eds. In other words, what happened there is that Omidyar, his libertarianism was only up to a certain point. He was a doctrinaire, personal liberal, and his overriding disgust with Trump really started to have him compromise his principles. He became obsessed with the idea that Facebook was responsible for, gaslight or for radicalizing the public, whereas, I think it's maybe people like Pierre Omidyar, but that's a whole other story. And essentially what has been revealed here is that this is really just a financed campaign for Frances Haugen, the Facebook whistleblower, by a rival oligarch, essentially, who hates Trump and has an ideological agenda. That doesn't diminish necessarily what the papers are.
Right.
And we can talk about some of that. But there's just a lot of fishy financing, number one. And two, when you look at this whistleblower herself, she says she's currently living in Puerto Rico because she bought Bitcoin very early. Cool, me too.
Crypto
it's
millionaire,
all about
apparently.
Bitcoin. I am not a crypto millionaire, unfortunately. I didn't have enough money to become one. But now she's living down in Puerto Rico, hanging out with her, quote, crypto friends. You know why? Because there's no capital gains tax down there for Puerto Rico residents.
Well,
so there's a lot going on here.
There is a lot going on. And I think it's important to separate a few things out, just as you were doing there. So listen, reporters, journalists, they get information from all kinds of sources.
Yeah.
Some of them above board, some of them very much not above board, all the time. Oftentimes, the people who you're receiving information or documents or leaks from have an ideological agenda. They have an axe to grind. They have a certain political perspective that they want out there or some sort of political goal ultimately. It might not always the case, but oftentimes the case. A good example of this that we talked about was the Hunter Biden laptop.
Of course.
Came from the sketchiest possible
Yeah, and we were very open about that. Like, hey, look.
But it doesn't matter. Right. What matters is what is the information and what is its relevance, and let's sort through that and figure out, what is in the public good here and what's in the public interest of transparency to know about a company in Facebook run by a billionaire that has a tremendous amount of power, although that power may be diminishing. We'll get to that in a moment. So it's important to separate those two things out. However, it also is very important to know if the leaker or whistleblower, however you want to peg Frances Haugen, it's important to know what the ideological agenda is.
Yes.
Because this is one of the things we talk about on this show all the time. It especially applies oftentimes in any sort of national security or foreign policy stuff.
Follow the money.
Follow the money, follow the ideological agenda, and remember that, everything is being pushed in a certain direction. And that's what you see very clearly with the, very polished rollout of Frances Haugen, where she selects, to start with, a reporter at the Wall Street Journal who she feels, because of his past reporting, is going to view the information in the light that she wants him to. Okay, so she starts with that. And then after giving the Wall Street Journal an exclusive for a time, and we covered some of the revelations there, which were interesting, including that Facebook, they'd lied about their treatment of elites versus everybody else. And they basically give white glove treatment to celebrities and political officials, et cetera. So after the Wall Street Journal has their crack at it, that's when she opens the door to this hand-picked consortium that they invite onto a Zoom call to say, hey, we'll give you guys a crack at it. Y'all got to work together. We're going to put this embargo in place. This piece of it is being run by Bill Burton, who, as you point out, former Obama guy. Aspects of this, she says that she has her own financial resources. This isn't the Ben Smith piece, but that she's accepted help from nonprofit groups that are backed by Pierre Omidyar for travel and similar expenses. So she's being funded in a certain sense from this other rival billionaire.
Yes.
And so it's just important to have that frame in mind as you're looking at this. And of course, the political end result is also really important, because even though you do have some people on the right who are actually serious about antitrust and serious about dealing with power, and not just interested in we want to be the censors, not y'all. And even though you do have some people on the left who are similarly serious, we know that there is a dominant strain within the Democratic Party that mostly wants to use these sorts of revelations just to censor.
And that's
not to challenge power, not to actually think more deeply about the way not just Facebook, but Google. I just saw Google like removed a left-leaning news outlet from YouTube. The way that all of these tech oligarchs have so much hold on society and what we can do about it. So I think those are the pieces that are important to separate out. Important to understand what her ideological lean is. She's been, to her credit, pretty upfront.
She's been open
about what she wants to see happen. Important to understand that, and also important to deal with the information and for us to think deeply about what this means about how we might foster a better democracy where, you know, you have free speech truly honored and you don't have these tech oligarchs responsible for who gets to say what in the public square.
I think that's the most important part. And this isn't really to besmirch her. It's more to say, how is this information being used and to what agenda? And increasingly, all across the mainstream media, we are seeing it used as justification for trying to censor Facebook. Either pressure Facebook into self-censoring or really pressuring Congress and the White House and more in order to censor Facebook. We've already seen the current White House try to dictate to Facebook what posts should stay up and what should not. We've seen them say that if you're banned from Facebook, you should be banned from other platforms. But increasingly, Krystal, I am so frustrated about this because it presumes that Facebook is the most important place, you know, for everything. And guess what, guys? The most important part of the Facebook documents, to me, let's put this up there from The Verge, which is that inside Facebook's lost generation, they find Facebook's own data shows that it has an increasingly aging boomer user base, that the majority of the people who are active on the platform are are aging, that they are aging up, that young people increasingly are abandoning not just the core product of blue Facebook, but Instagram as well. My friend Alex Kantrowitz, who has his own big technology newsletter, let's put this up there. He grabbed this from inside of the Facebook papers. Their own data shows that teenagers spend 2 to 3 times more time on TikTok than they do on Instagram. And TikTok has currently surpassed Instagram for time on app, which means that they have your attention for more time than Instagram has. That is the entire ballgame. So beneath all of this, Krystal, is this monomaniacal obsession with Facebook. Oh, we need to get Facebook to censor. And it's all just because that is where the boomers are. In terms of broader American culture, it is radically diminishing in its effect. That's the biggest story in the whole world to me. So this whole like, oh, we got to break up Facebook, regulate Facebook. Yeah, I mean, that's like a near-term problem. But if we want to talk about actual, you know, technology in the future, I think Facebook, by their own admission, Mark Zuckerberg yesterday on his earnings call went out and said, I believe we actually have this tweet, let's put it up there, which is that he said Facebook will be moving to retooling to make serving young adults the North Star rather than optimizing for older people. He says the shift will take years and not months. So to me, the only part of this story that Facebook itself is reacting to is the now emperor has no clothes moment where you're like, wait, Facebook is kind of a dying company. Now, I'm not going to say they don't make billions, trillions of dollars. Definitely true. But it is going much more in the vein of Microsoft, where it's just like this enterprise software that makes a lot of money, but it's like really boring, as opposed to the actual like driver of culture and politics. So in the near term, it's definitely true. But I would say in the future and where the discussion should be focused, it should be a lot more than Facebook.
I mean, the fact of the matter is that these same issues that we talk about with Facebook apply to all of these giant tech and social media companies. So whether or not Facebook is on its way in, doubtful, or on its way out, more likely, some of the same principles apply here. And also, I would say, look, obviously, I mean, listen, I have a teenage daughter.
Yeah.
She would laugh her head off to think of even getting on Facebook. And she spends way more time on TikTok than she has an Instagram account. She sort of occasionally uses it.
They have Finstas and more Finstas.
Yeah, I mean, she dabbles in, but she definitely is more sort of addicted to TikTok. No doubt about it. Even my 8-year-old son would tell you, like, Facebook's for old people.
Exactly.
Right? Like, the conventional wisdom about it is, in fact, true. On the other hand, we do know right now that Facebook was really instrumental for Trump. I mean,
Absolutely.
they
Again,
leaned
boomers.
They leaned very heavily into Facebook. And fortunately, or unfortunately, boomers are very politically powerful, right? So this is a group that votes. This is a group that, engages in a lot of cringe memeing and all of those things. So
they're very loud.
I don't want to say that Facebook is like irrelevant to politics, because I just think that is not accurate at this time. Is it going to, be like a cultural trendsetter among young people? No. I mean, Zuckerberg is trying to retool it. They are changing the name even. They're investing in building the metaverse. I don't really know what that means, but probably because I'm too old to understand it. But that's the direction that they're going in to try to recapture the attention of young people here. But there's another issue that I think is important to kind of separate out, which is that there's a difference between being, having the ability to have a platform and being able to say what you want to say without censorship, which is something I am extremely in support of. And I think the banning of Trump and the censorship that we've seen of figures on the ideological right and the ideological left, I think is a horrific infringement on people's free speech rights, because at this point, the public square is these online social media spaces. Part of what we do learn in this reveal, though, is that they juice the algorithm to not just sort of allow content that may be, less than ideal or super inflammatory, designed to make you angry and make you feel, those sort of rageful emotions, but they elevated that. So it was not like a neutral surfacing of content. I think that's an important thing to ultimately think about. But look, the bottom line with all of this is that we don't want to take the power from one billionaire, Mark Zuckerberg, and hand it to another like Pierre Omidyar.
100%.
We don't want to take the power from Mark Zuckerberg and hand it to like Joe Biden and Kamala Harris.
No!
Either, right? These platforms really need to have their power checked. And, this isn't like a personal affront to either Pierre Omidyar or Mark Zuckerberg. Or Joe Biden for that matter. You should not have one person who has so much control over what are absolutely critical spaces of public debate. There should be a lot more of a democratic process of thinking through how these spaces are operated, how the algorithm works, how things, because you're going to have certain content, hate speech and threats and those sorts of things that are out of bounds. Where do we draw those lines? How do we make sure, and this to me is maybe the most critical part, how do we make sure those lines are drawn and enforced in a transparent and consistent manner? Because that's the other thing that you learn from these Facebook files is it's wildly inconsistent.
Yeah, they're just making it up.
It's seat of their pants.
Right.
And there's tons of politics that are involved. They're worried about a backlash from the right, but then they're worried they don't like the content of this outlet or that outlet. So these are not like content neutral. Here's the rule. We're going to apply it and we're going to disseminate to everyone why and how we applied it. No, these are deeply political decisions that comes across very clearly. There's different treatment for elites versus the rank and file because they're worried about PR blow-ups if the elites are wrongly censored. They know that their automated algorithms for pulling content are deeply flawed. They know all of these things, and they consistently lie to you about the way that their platform ultimately operates. So I think there are things to take from this that are interesting, but the overall point here is that, of course, what it's mostly being used to drive towards is just more censorship and more, sort of like power vested in a different group of people to decide what's allowed on the platform and what's not.
That would be my takeaway as well. I'm a very big believer in algorithmic transparency and in moderation transparency. I think these companies should be forced by the FCC in order to publish their moderation guidelines.
100%.
So that way we know whether they're abiding by their rules or not. That way there's no politics. You're just like, look, these are the rules. This is what they are. This is how we came to them. You either follow it or you don't. And that is, unfortunately, that kind of common sense stuff, doesn't have a lot of headway here in Washington because, as you said, the real battle is over trying to censor each other, not actually making it a fair playing ground for everybody.
That's well said. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.